Hi everyone, this is Chris Reitz from CA Technologies, and today I'm going to be talking about two different products, CA Service Virtualization and CA API Management, and we're going to discuss how you can use these products together to gain even more speed and agility in your development and testing cycles. So we're going to do a few things. First, I'll give a high-level overview of why customers are using CA API Management. Then we'll talk a little bit about CA Service Virtualization, and then we'll really dive into how to leverage the two products together, and we'll conclude with a short demo. So let's talk first about CA API Management. So why are customers today using this technology? Mainly it's because in the new digital economy, we need to give access to the outside world to our core internal pieces of data and applications, and we need to do it quickly but safely and securely, right? So by using this API management gateway, we're able to integrate everything together. We're able to do it securely so that we don't have to worry, about people who we don't want getting into that data being able to get in. We're able to accelerate the development of our, of the external pieces like mobile and IoT. And finally, what all that really means is that we're unlocking all of that value of the internal enterprise data that we have. And again, we're doing it safely and securely. Right? So if you look at this list here, these are all the different benefits that our customers are getting from using the API gateway, the CA API management gateway. And the greatest thing about this is that you get all this, by just utilizing the technology. You don't have to work all this into your own applications so that your developers can spend more time focusing on the actual business logic and less time spent doing redundant tasks like securing the interfaces, right? So with CA Service Virtualization, the main idea here is the removal of constraints from both test and development, right? So a constraint could be a system that hasn't been developed yet, or it could be a system that is available, but maybe it's not easily accessible, something like a mainframe or an external system that not every developer would have access to. We're able to utilize service virtualization to stand in place for those pieces, either before they've been written or when they're not available, and allow our developers and testers to continue doing what they need to do. So our customers have reported savings up to 50% of reduction in time for their development and test cycles. 90% more defects were detected earlier on in the life cycle, so they were able to fix those defects earlier. And ultimately, millions of dollars saved in both infrastructure costs and third-party fees. So let's talk about how we can combine those two technologies to get even more value. So we're going to look at three different phases. We're going to look at the plan phase, the build phase, and the run phase. So in the plan phase, one of the nice things about leveraging the two technologies together is we can take our virtual services that we created inside of CA Service Virtualization, and we can utilize the API management portal to be able to make those virtual services discoverable and more easily to consume by the people that need to consume them. Right? So the same way that we would put our live endpoints into the portal, we can also put the virtual endpoints in there so that when developers are browsing to find the right API to utilize, maybe before the real one's available, they could look and find the virtual instance of that API and begin their development or testing against that. Now, when we talk about the build phase, what we're talking about is the ability to leverage, virtual services behind the API management gateway in order that the consumers can hit either one, right? So maybe before the real service is written again, we would take a virtual service and put it behind the gateway so that the people that need to consume the service could begin their development and testing. And then once the real service is available, we can make that configuration change in the gateway to point the endpoint to the live service so that our consumers don't have to be changing where they're pointing to. Right? Another kind of similar use case would be the ability to intelligently route between the live service and the virtual service. So for instance, you might have a certification process where you're certifying external consumers of your services. You might choose to make everybody start by testing against a virtual service, and then once they've been certified, then you can intelligently route them to the live services, once you're confident in their ability to interface with you. Another example might be you have a version of your live service, and then you're getting ready to work on the next version of that service. you could create a virtual instance of that next version before the real one's ready, and then you could intelligently route testing of the next version against that virtual service, and then anything that needs to hit the live service on the older version, you could go ahead and route those appropriately. Finally, we're going to talk about the run phase here, which is the ability to easier creation and maintenance of virtual services by leveraging the gateway. So if you're familiar with service virtualization, then you already know you can create virtual services by doing recordings where you stand up a recorder in between the consumer and the live service, and you run transactions through, and you can create a virtual service that way. In addition, you could also create virtual services by pointing it to interface specifications like WSDL, a Waddle, Swagger docs, RAMLs, or you could use request response pairs or packet samples. What's cool in the new integration between DevTest and API management is now we can actually turn the API management gateway into like a recorder for DevTest. So we can, anything that flows through the gateway, we could capture those transactions and then use those transactions to actually create a virtual service. So that's what I'm going to show you in the demo this afternoon. And let me explain that really quickly, what we're going to show. So we have an application called Forward Cars, and it has a couple different components. It has a web UI, and then it has an ESB layer, and then behind the ESB layer, there's a loan and an inventory system. What we're going to do is we're going to stand up an APIM gateway between our web UI and the ESB so that all of the web transactions will go through the gateway first before getting to the ESB. Then what we'll do is we'll add in a policy from DevTest, which is going to turn that gateway into the recorder that we talked about. So that when the transactions go through from the web to the ESB, when they pass through that gateway, the gateway will push all of those transactions into our DevTest database. Then we'll create a virtual service from that and stand it up behind the APIM gateway so that when we run from our web UI, we can use the gateway to route transactions to either the ESB, to either the live ESB or our virtual ESB. All right? So let's go ahead and I'll show you the web UI of our application. So here's our web UI, and if we go in here, we can take a look at the configuration of our app, and we can see that it's right now pointing to explore.apim.ca, which is our APIM gateway. So all the transactions we do, for instance, if I were to hit this button here, the transaction that just happened went through our APIM gateway, and this is our APIM gateway policy manager. And right now, the policy says take all the transactions that come in for that Cars app and send them back to port 7000 on my local machine. And on port 7000 on my local machine, I have an ESB. This is the live application that's running in a JBoss container. So anytime we do a transaction here, it's going through that gateway and then on to the live ESB. Now what we want to do is we want to use DevTest to push that policy that's going to allow us to start recording those transactions. So up here in the admin dropdown, I have this APIM integration tab. Here's where I can specify the location of my gateway, which is explore.apim.ca on port 8443. We need to give it a nickname for our gateway, and then we need to give it some credentials for our gateway because we're going to be pushing a policy to it. Finally, we need to give our DevTest credentials because the policy on the gateway is going to need to push the transaction data into the DevTest database. It will use those credentials to do that. There is some options here I can provide. I could provide a regular expression which would allow it to only capture certain transactions, but I want to capture all of them, so I'll leave that blank. Oh, I think I probably fat-fingered my password there. Let's try it again. There we go. So it's pushing the policy out there. If I wanted to validate that the policy has been pushed, I could open up our policy manager again. Down here on the left-hand side, I don't have any folders that say gateway service virtualization, but if I just refresh, now I can see, okay, here's that folder, and these are the policies that got pushed out from DevTest. So at this point now, I could come back over to our application, and I could rerun those same transactions. Now I'm not going to change anything on my configuration, so I don't need to change any endpoints to point to any recorders or anything. Everything's still going through the APIM gateway. But as I run these different transactions, the transaction data, while it's going through the gateway, is also being pushed into our dev test database. So we could come out here now to our dev test portal again, and if we came out here and we clicked on this Analyze Transactions tab, I can see here's our different transactions that got picked up. Up here I could even narrow it down by a particular service if I wanted to, and I could do it by a particular time frame, so I could say show me everything in the last 10 minutes. Or a really nice feature is I could even do a custom time, so I could say show me everything that happened yesterday between 3:30 and 4 o'clock for this particular service. So you can even create virtual services for transactions that happened in the past. Once you get that time range and that filter the way you want it, then you can come in and you can start placing transactions on the shelf. And what that means is that these are all the transactions that I want to create my virtual service from. So when we go to create a virtual service now, we're going to give it a name. So we'll call this Cars ESB service. We'll tell it that we want to create a stateless service. And if I were to click on this button, this will show me all the different transactions that are going to make up that virtual service. I could remove some if I wanted to, but we'll go ahead and use them all. Go ahead and click on the next button. We're going to tell it which project that we want to put this virtual service inside of. We'll use Cars Demo. And when we're done, we'll remove things off the shelf because we don't need them anymore. Now it's creating that virtual service for us. It says it's done. So at this point, I could go out to my workstation and I could take a look at what was created. So here's our virtual service image. This shows the different operations that were captured and virtual service created from. So for instance, I could take a look at this one where different VIN numbers were coming in and these were the responses that were going back. All right? So now what we can do, let's go ahead and change our live service. We'll change our virtual service so that it runs on port 15063. And then we'll save this virtual service and then we'll deploy it out. Once it's been deployed, we'll go ahead back out to our portal, our web portal, and we'll just verify that. So we'll click on Monitor Virtual Service Environments. And we can see that our Cars ESB is out there on 15063 and it's seen 0 transactions. So now what we do, we can come back out to our policy manager and let's change it so that it no longer sends transactions to port 7000. Let's make it send all the transactions to our virtual service which runs on 15063. Now again, what's nice is I don't have to change anything on my Cars application. We'll leave it configured the same way it was. But now when I come out here and run all these different transactions, I'm not actually hitting my live service anymore. I'm actually hitting my virtual service. And I can verify that by looking at the transaction counts here, which keep going up. Right? So the other way I could verify it is I could take a car that we didn't record, like this Audi S4 here, and if I click on the details, if it was against the live system, I would expect to see a price of $7,800. But now when I check it, I'm actually getting my meta match back from my virtual service. But it's really easy to flip the endpoints between virtual and live. So if I wanted to, I could go ahead and set it back to send to the live system. And now when I check that same car, now I'm getting that 7,800 because it's hitting the live service. So the last thing I want to show you is how you can actually do some intelligent routing. So we'll come back out to our policy here. We'll take a look at some additional logic we have in here. This additional logic says, look at the incoming header values. If there's a header value called use virtual, and if it's set to true, then route things to our virtual service on 15063. Otherwise, route it to port 7000, which is the live service. So to show you how this works, and let me make sure that's been deployed. Yep, it has. Okay, so to show you how this works, I'm actually going to use a test case inside a dev test so that I can manipulate the headers easier. So this particular test case is going to send in a VIN number, and it's going to send it in through our gateway. And if we look at the headers that are set, I have this use virtual, but I have it set to false, which means it should hit our live service when we run it. So if we look here, we can see the response that came back, and it's telling us that this is that red Audi and the price tag on it was $7,800. Now if I were to change that header value and tell it to use true, then I haven't changed anything in the gateway. I haven't changed anything with where I'm pointing to. All I do is change a header value. And now you can see I'm actually getting back this silver car, which has a price of $39.95. So I can, it's showing me that I'm actually getting my virtual response back. So this is great when I want to be able to do some testing against a different endpoint without actually having to change where my client points to. I can just use these headers and allow the API management gateway policy to point me to either the live or the virtual. So I hope that helped show you how you can leverage both CA service virtualization and API management together to get even more value and move your dev and test cycles along even more agilely and quicker. So thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it.